Thanks for tuning into this month's Shutter Mag article. I'm going to walk you through how to import Lightroom catalogs into Capture One. Before you freak out, run away from this tutorial. I want to assure you it's more painless than it sounds. The biggest concern Lightroom users have with Capture One is the way it looks, maybe performance, maybe efficiency, what have you. I'm not going to be covering efficiency, quality of images. I'm going to be talking about the interface, how to transition from Lightroom to Capture One, and how to make Capture One a little more recognizable for those Lightroom users. Like with any software, take the time, learn the basics, spend time in the software, learn how it works. The tools are very similar, but you have to understand how they're different and how to utilize the things that Capture One has versus maybe what Lightroom was lacking. Another thing that's very important, like with any software, is you have to customize it. Make it your workspace. That's what's going to create efficiency and a little more comfortable experience with the software overall. Then we're going to actually migrate Lightroom catalogs into Capture One, kind of show you what's transferring, what doesn't, how to go from there. So let's start by opening up Capture One. If you've downloaded the free trial, of course it's available for 30 days for your use, free of charge. I highly recommend doing so. You're at no risk doing that. So opening up Capture One, I don't have any catalogs. I'm going to create a new one. First recognizable term, catalog. Awesome. Lightroom uses catalogs. What's this other thing, session? We're not going to get into that. Sessions are completely different. It's more like if you're tethering or if you're client specific, you're creating a session, a one-time use thing. I like to think of a catalog as an archive, a master database for all these sessions or shoots. Don't want to confuse you that I'm photographing. So I'm going to create a new catalog and start from there. I'm just going to name this Master Catalog 2017. I usually create one different year to year. That's perfectly fine. Nothing alarming yet. I'm going to save it to my desktop. Sure, that sounds great. It's going to add a master catalog file on my desktop. It's opening up this software. It's got a bunch of tutorials for you to go through, learn more about the software. We don't need to go through that. I'm just going to go through the main points, the basics, how to transition into Capture One. Once we click on close here, now we're in a familiar phase. We're looking at a blank software. Like in Lightroom, you have to bring the images into the software. We got to do the same thing in Capture One. Images come into this program, they get worked on, they have to come out of this program in order for us to send to our printers, album design, Photoshop, what have you. They come in and out of this software. So we can start by importing images. That's the first option. Nothing too crazy there. What we can do is I'm going to expand this screen a bit. We can take we can take folders of raw files and bring them directly into Capture One. Same thing we would do with Lightroom. So I can go to my Finder folder, navigate to where all my raws are, and I have them for the time being on an external hard drive. And maybe you've already taken them from your memory card, maybe you haven't. I'm going to walk through this like you've already done your backup, you've already taken them from your memory card. We don't need to get into that part of ingesting files. We just want to take files that we've already backed up, they're already on external hard drives, get them into Capture One. I'm going to take this folder and literally drag it in. Pretty simple. Same thing you can do in Lightroom. You don't have to go through on the left-hand side, find all the destination where you're importing from. That's where these files are coming from. So next panel down, it's going to include its subfolders as well. We can choose where these files are going to. They can stay in the current location, which is like the same thing in Lightroom when you're doing, instead of copy, you're adding files into Lightroom. This is basically the same thing. We're going to add files into Capture One. We're not moving them. They stay at the same source that they're coming from, whereas the external hard drive, and we're just choosing to add them to Capture One. That's what we're going to do here. If we want to choose a separate folder, meaning that we want to take the files from a source, copy them to a new source, that's an option to choose a specific folder, a new place. You can also do backup, same thing like Lightroom. So if you're coming from a memory card, you definitely want to choose a destination and also choose a backup. It's got to go in two places. You're crazy if you're not doing that. Moving on, you can change the naming. Nothing out of the ordinary there. Metadata. Now we have this option down here for adjustments. We can choose styles, or what Lightroom likes to use is presets. A style is going to be something more user-based. Maybe it's a recipe. That's another term that's being used in Capture One with like lens correction, You can choose different white balances, exposures, different recipes that you want to stylize your images as they come into Capture One. So you don't see them in their at capture stage, you see them with your recipe applied to them. There's a lot of customization, bringing files in here. Moving on, you can choose auto adjust. It's a great option for auto exposure, auto white balance. You can customize the preferences of what automatically is applying if you create a style. When you do auto adjust, it's the defaults for what Capture One uses. Something to consider when bringing in images. Another thing is including existing adjustments. Awesome. What does this mean? Does it mean I have XMP metadata that I've saved in Camera Raw or in Lightroom? Is that data going to come into Capture One? We'll cover what data is and isn't once we get to the migrating catalogs, but what I can tell you up front is XMPs are proprietary for Adobe. Capture One has their own proprietary metadata files. So these things don't work well together. The XMP metadata is not going to import. You're not going to have exposure, white balance, highlights, shadows. That data is not coming in. Let's move on. I'm going to keep this including existing adjustments because things like ratings, 5 stars, color labels, those type of things will transition in and are very important for organizing our Capture One catalog and images the same way we did in Lightroom. I'm going to click Import All, and we're immediately seeing images populate into our Capture One catalog. As you notice, things look a little similar to Lightroom. They look, some things are a little bit different. Of course, I'm working in a customized workspace right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip the script and go back to the default workspace. And now we're looking at probably what most of you, when you open up Capture One, is you see a film strip on the right-hand side. Where are my tools? Where are the adjustments? I don't even know what to do. I'm clicking on images. Where am I in this software? Where are my tools? Where's Develop panel? Where's Library? Don't freak out. We'll get there. So as we're importing files, let's talk about what Capture One's doing. Capture One's creating previews right now. Awesome. What do those previews mean? Well, it's actually creating previews that are similar to one-to-one previews, similar to standard previews, and similar to Lightroom's smart previews. Smart previews, as some of you, or many of you probably know, allows you to edit offline. Okay, what does that mean? I'm off the internet? No, it means that your raw files aren't connected to the catalog, which for mobile users, for people on the go, ones that don't want to have terabytes of data with them on the road, they want to do some edits, selecting, you can do that, swap catalogs with smart previews. It allows you to take hundreds of gigabytes of data and have less than 10 gigs total, just in a small, simple way to explain smart previews. Capture One has that same option. Going up to the Capture One preferences, let's talk about how we can choose those different previews, how we can choose the size of them, and how they're a little bit different than Lightroom. When you click on the image panel, it's going to say cache preview image size. These are the previews that are going to automatically build. So 2560, pretty close to what the size of a smart preview is. I think a smart preview is right around 2650 or somewhere in that range for the longest edge for Lightroom. That's the default for Capture One. We can go all the way up to 5120. That's almost a full-size RAW file, pretty close to a one-to-one preview. Like one-to-one previews in Lightroom, that file size is going to be large. You're carrying around not the raw file, but this giant one-to-one preview. However, that preview still requires the raw file to be connected to the catalog. So what's the point? You need smart previews, but you can't change the resolution of the smart previews in Lightroom. Capture One, they've changed that game. You can actually carry these previews with you, work offline. I'll go through that in just a second. But just showing you the different preview options that you can choose. If you want to work on low res images that you're just selecting through, maybe doing some minor color correcting with, a lower preview size will keep your catalogs less heavy and less of a storage footprint on your hard drive. I have a terabyte drive on this computer. I'm not worried about that. I'm going to go ahead and keep it at 2560 just for efficiency. Just to keep in mind, whenever you're working, you're going to be limited when you zoom in. We'll cover that in a second. So I'm going to go ahead and leave it on that. I'm not going to mess with any of my other preference settings. I'm going to kind of leave those alone, not dig into that. So right now, we're connected. We have a recent import. We are connected specifically to our RAW files. As you see here, it's showing the original one, showing my photo hard drive. All this is connected. Capture One is happy. All right, Now what? Well, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to disconnect my external hard drive and see what happens. Exclamation points, normal. It's either question marks or exclamation points in Lightroom. Same deal here. So it's going to tell us, oh boy, we're missing those files. Not a big deal. So when I go back to these, you're going to see that there's an offline button at the offline message at the top of these. It's just saying that the files are offline. Well, can we still edit them? How far can we zoom in? All things that we can look at in just a second. See, we can zoom in and we see that it gets pixelated at a certain point because of the quality we chose. So we're zoomed out at about 100%, and that's pretty close to about what a smart preview is. You zoom into 1:1, it's going to be kind of it's going to be a bit pixelated, but it gives you the idea of what you need to see. So if we zoom out here, we can start to toggle image to image as I'm going with the right cursor, and it's just toggling image to image. And you see this film strip on the right hand side. I'm sure you're confused already with what to do. Not to worry, we can move on to the next phase of this and talk about customizing the workspace. Let's get Capture One looking a little more familiar. So before we get working on this, I highly recommend Googling a few things. You can Google Capture One Workspace, Capture One Lightroom Workspace, Capture One Lightroom keyboard shortcuts. These are all documents and things that many Capture One users that have migrated from Lightroom to Capture One have set up and created for you. You can do all that research. They've done a lot of work for you to just import it into Capture One. I want to show you how to customize things, make changes yourself, and actually be a little more familiar with the process of customizing the workspace. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with keyboard shortcuts. So we click on Capture One, go down here to Edit Keyboard Shortcuts, and we can start to customize any shortcuts that we want. Now, a big shortcut that I like to work with is creating modules. Like in Lightroom, we have a library module. It's our grid of images. It's where we're just looking, where maybe we're calling, we're reviewing, and then we have our develop, where we're doing our editing. That's the first thing that I like to change. So going into the Edit Keyboard shortcut option, we're noticing there's all these commands and these fields. These fields are set up very similar to the menu at the top here. There are a few other options that are not included, but in going through here, what we can do is we can create a library style view where we're looking at a grid of images, and we can actually assign the G key, so because it's stuck in our brain from Lightroom, you hit G and you go to the grid mode and we're there. That's what I want to do in Capture One. So I can go down to the library option by choosing the viewer, and as you see, viewer is going to be our option for viewing images in grid mode. It's going to be our library module. So remember that viewer is like the library module. Perfect. Moving on, it's already set there, but if I wanted to change this, I can click on this option and click the F key. I can change it to F, I can change it to E. Oh, but here's an issue, right? E is being used by the erase mask. You can't have multiple letters being used for different shortcuts. So it gives you that error at the bottom. I'm going to keep it as G because I've assigned G for the grid already. Just kind of showing you how you can change each of these commands and assign a custom keyboard shortcut. So I'm going to go ahead and close out of this. Actually, first what I want to do is make sure that when you create your own style, you can have the Capture One default. So all of them kind of change back to these foreign shortcuts that we probably don't know any of. And you can actually create your own custom list, your shortcut set. So I've already created one for my workflow that has a lot of changes in it already. But when you start to customize these, or you import maybe one from that you found on Google that somebody else already kind of created, you can rename it to my workflow, Lightroom workflow, whatever you want to do. There's plenty of options. I think this is a Lightroom style shortcuts that I found online and then customized it and renamed it my workflow. Pretty simple to do. If I click on that, not too much has changed, but there's a lot of customization between each of these panels that you can do. So moving on, I'm going to go ahead and hit close. I'm going to hit that G key. Oh my gosh, grid mode's back. This is looking great, right? So you have a little bit of familiarity. It's a little bit of a Lightroom sense of comfort in looking in Capture One. Now we have this left-hand panel here that looks like it's got metadata. It's got, it looks pretty familiar to what we're used to. Again, this is not default for Capture One. I've done some customization and moving this panel over here. So already this little folder says library. That's making me feel familiar. We can go through these different tool tabs and start to customize those different spaces. So we click on the different tool tabs, and as we move over, it's capture, lens correction, histogram, looks like color adjustments. We have like this little histogram level, which looks like, hey, here's some develop adjustments that we want to have. So now what we can do is we can start to make Capture One look a little more familiar. Where's our develop panel? So first of all, let's start with I'm going to go back here to library. Let's start with getting this film strip to the bottom. Because when I click on G, great, I can view my images. I don't need my film strip. I don't need develop settings. I just want to look at images. I want to double click on them, and I want to be now in develop mode. Well, develop mode is also known as browse. So remember that. Library is viewer. Develop mode is browse. So what we want to do is we want to place browser below. So by clicking on view, we can do just that. Boom. Now our browse option is on the bottom. Now you may not be able to toggle between images very well because it's still in grid mode. There's an actual film strip option here that you want to make sure you select, so it's more like a film strip. Oh my gosh, we're getting closer. So we can start toggling through images like we normally do when we develop, and we can start editing these. Now, as you notice that these are kind of out of order, and they're not in the order of capture time. That's because it defaults to name. Not a problem. We can go ahead and choose date, and it's going to reorder our images through capture time. Now this looks a little more familiar through the timeline of our wedding day. Getting ready, creatives, ceremony, creatives, reception, right? So we're going in and we're double clicking on our first image here. Still saying offline, perfectly fine. So now we've got our film strip on the bottom. Now we need to get our toolbar on the right-hand side. So what we need to do is make sure we choose the right tools and we start bringing them to the right. So what we can do is we can go to view, start messing around with the tool tab. So what we want to do is we can add tool, remove tool, place tool to the right, auto mode. What are all these things, right? So tools, this whole panel here is just all called tools. So when we do view, place tools to the right, it's going to throw that all the way to the right. Well, what we can start to do is we can start to grab specific tool panels out of here, by clicking on the actual panel, and we could throw them to the other side of the browser. Pretty cool. We could take the filters, do the same thing. We hover over the bottom and they get connected, right? So we can start to do that with all of these options here. We can remove tool tab. So we can remove that tool tab because we grabbed it over here. Exposure evaluation, I don't know. How do I reorder these, right? When we hold command, we can click on them and move them to the end. I could care less about that one. Lens correction, and that's probably going to be important. Let's put it here. Histogram, color correction module, and that's going to be pretty important. We'll put it back here. Now we have our histogram, exposure, dynamic range, highlight, shadow, levels. Oh, this is looking a lot more familiar. Maybe a little more graphic than you're used to than Lightroom, but certainly a lot better for Capture One. So letting you know, you can start to customize these different tools. These are all considered tools. These up here are going to be your tool tabs, quite literally, because they're different tabs you're cycling through. And you can customize this beyond belief as far as you want to go. But now we're kind of in a stage to where we're starting to make Capture One, and I'm going to drag this in because it's covering up my image. We can start to make Capture One look a little more familiar, right? So I can drag this panel up, drag it all the way down to the bottom, and now I can start to toggle between my images, and it's starting to look a lot more familiar. This is great. I can hit G, I got my grid of images, I can hit, right? If I hit the D key, it doesn't do anything, right? That's the only thing. I can toggle between G to go back and forth. I can double click on an image and it takes me right to where I need to be. and I can have this tool tab. No matter what, the tool tab's always up. Pretty cool. So we're getting much closer to getting a develop mode and a library module. Like I said, take some time. Customize it as much as you want. Biggest thing you got to remember, right, when you're done, is going up to Window, Workspace, and save the workspace. So I'm just going to call it Dustin. Dustin's fave. Sure. So I'm going to hit save. So it's going to remember this. And if I want to change workspaces, I can go back to default, go back to the Lightroom default, which is running my window around here. Go back to workspace, go back to Dustin's fave, and I'm right back where I need to be. Pretty simple. All right, so we're a little more familiar maybe with Capture One. Let's import the Lightroom catalogs and actually see what's going on between Lightroom and Capture One. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to go ahead and go to File, Import Catalog, and I'm going to choose Lightroom Catalog. Pretty simple. This important notice that's being popped up here is important to consider. Collections, cropping, rotation, orientation, white balance, exposure, saturation. These are the things that are being imported. Everything else is not. Remember, they're approximations. They're not going to be exactly the same in Lightroom. Again, these are two different raw processors trying to communicate data. The fact that it can import exposure and white balance, saturation and contrast, that's pretty amazing in itself. There are just different ways the images are going to be processed, and rightfully so. Certain things shouldn't transfer between Lightroom and Capture One because they process the images differently. So I'm going to go ahead and hit continue, and I'm going to choose a catalog. Now I'm getting this error message, unable to import offline files. What this is telling me is that my Lightroom catalog that I'm trying to import is not connected to the original files. Well, that's a problem because I can't import files with just smart previews. They got to be the originals, right? So I'm going to go ahead and hit stop, and I have to go to my hard drive, replug it back in because I've already ejected it. And you'll notice, of course, on my files, they should go from offline and correct themselves. It's pretty nice. It doesn't require me to relink the files, do too much work with it's giving me a green light now. It's pretty great with Capture One. I don't have to relink my files after plugging in. I think the same thing happens for Lightroom as long as you haven't moved the files around. Both softwares are pretty smart with finding the RAWs if you haven't moved folders, renamed them, of course. Let's go back. So we want to import Lightroom catalog. File, import catalog, Lightroom, continue, thank you. We're going to go back here and choose this catalog here. We got our originals. And now it's reading those files. It's telling me 48 files imported. Nothing was incompatible, nothing's offline, file skipped. That's good to know. And now we're slowly going to start getting changes. We should. Exposure. And I'm going to add a tool for white balance here. And that's how simple it is. We can pull white balance up, put it at the very top. Now, what you'll notice is I don't have any develop settings. That's kind of odd. Good thing to do is to check to make sure that we have, let's go to all images. And it looks like it's creating variants or multiple images while I'm bringing these in. So it's showing my different imports. I have that import versus this one. So now my changes are coming in. Something to take note of. Still have 48 images in my folder. Nothing's changed there. But the actual files with the adjustments, and I'm going to go to the outdoor images. Again, changing sort by to date. And now I'm actually seeing custom adjustments. So that's something to consider when you're importing images in. It's not going to override the current ones I've imported. It sees it as two separate things. I have an import from Lightroom and I have an import original files. So that's something to consider. What I would recommend doing if you're bringing all of your images into Lightroom is importing the catalogs versus importing the files. then importing a catalog. Doesn't make sense. It's twice as much work. Might as well just import all of the Lightroom catalogs directly into Capture One without importing the files first. Moving on, as you can see, my exposures drop down. It's got contrast to 3. I'm not a big contrast fan, but we can see the differences here. Now, moving into some differences between what we're seeing in Capture One and Lightroom, let me go ahead and open up that this specific catalog real quick, and we can look at the actual differences between these two catalogs. I drag this down here to Lightroom. And again, I don't want to go through a huge quality battle between the images, but just kind of looking at them. Between image here and going back into Capture One, we have the ability to zoom in here and kind of see. Interesting, right? So the Capture One is a little bit cooler in color, a little less saturated. Overall, it doesn't have the same shadow recovery. That's something high dynamic range. Again, I'm not jumping into the tool panel. That'll be for a future article. But just kind of showing you the difference. I mean, it's bringing the images in. Going back to Capture One, if I want to toggle between the before and afters, right? I don't have a before and after option. Where is that option? What I can do is I can do Command R to reset my image, and then Command Z to go back to the edited image. That's the quick fix to look at before and after. Not a whole lot of changes. The image looks pretty good overall. But in getting into the tips and tricks, right? There's some things about Capture One that you're kind of stuck with. The before and after preview, you just don't have that option to edit. I'd have to create a variant for each image. And showing that, we can actually do that by going all images. This is a good representation of how before and afters would work. So we would actually have to look at and actually have double the amount of images. So you notice I have 96 in my catalog, and there's really only 48 images we're looking at. But Capture One looks at it as 96. 48 of them are unedited, and 48 of them are edited. So toggling between those two images, let me show you that real quick. This one got a little out of control with the exposure. But we can see the toggle between 48 unedited files, 48 edited files. So these are the edited here. But that's how the variance would work. So we'd actually have to toggle between 96 images rather than just saying 48 with the before and after preview. Again, it's more frustrating rather than a stopping point for me to use Capture One. Another thing is the inability to hover over the sliders and use my up and down arrows to make changes, much like Camera Raw users. It's just one of those, you got to click on the slider and go. You can double click on the slider to reset it. That's a quick fix as well. Instead of clicking on exposure, you can single click on it to see turned on and off. But to actually reset this file without typing in 0 in this entry here, as we double click on the slider itself, it goes back. Simple things, like I said, taking a little more time to get used to Capture One. Those things are normal. Syncing between images. I think a lot of Lightroom users love how quick it is to sync develop settings between them. That's probably the last thing I'm going to cover for this tutorial, because there's a lot of things we have covered. But to me, that's very important in efficiency and workflow. So let's go through a section of images where we want to specifically work that way. So I got to make sure, let's go up here to Workspace, go to Dustin's fave, so it adjusts everything a little closer to how I left it. So I can go image to image here, choosing film strip. So let's say, for instance, I wanted to match these settings, do a little more high dynamic range, come down on the highlights, lift some shadows, just kind of going through quickly. Here's my black and white point where levels is set. Nothing too crazy. We're going to do before and after. If I want to sync these images, I'd have to create a hotkey or a keyboard shortcut for that specifically. So adjustments, copy and apply adjustments, all in one fell swoop. So what this does is that once I hit this command, which is Shift Command S, it's going to copy these developed settings and sync them automatically to any images I have selected in the film strip. Let me demonstrate it. So I've created these adjustments. What I'm going to do with these images is I'm going to reset adjustments. Yes. So these are all unadjusted images. As we can see, as I'm going through, they're all set to 0. Perfect. Let's zoom out a bit. I go to my first image, I hold Shift, I go to the last image in the sequence. Hasn't done anything yet. I do Shift, Command, S. Boom. Now I can click here, go back into my grid mode, click on the images. As you notice, we're in grid. It took me out of film strip. And right, so we already have a browser issue, right? We want to just choose one image at a time. If you notice at the top here, it went to grid. Something to remember, this is how you're viewing your this is how it's browsing your images. You have your film strip at the bottom. You want to make sure we're clicked on primary, which is what that option is going to be. So when you're down here and browse, the primary view mode is in primary view versus multi-view. So again, just getting familiar with Capture One, and we go image to image, and we see that adjustment saved, but it's not the right setting, right? So we're gonna toggle back and forth, adjust that a bit. Looking pretty close here. Maybe a little bit of white balance. Again, we don't have white balance in this panel. Let's just add the tool. Go down here to white balance. I'm gonna drag it up to where it's a little more familiar. I'm gonna warm up my Kelvin just a bit, toggling back and forth. That's pretty much as simple as it is. I'm going to hold Shift, select these images, Shift, Command S. Pretty quick. Again, that's all I have for you guys for migrating your Lightroom catalogs into Capture One. Check out future articles for more efficiency in using Capture One as a whole. It's a great program. They're making it quite comparable to Lightroom and making a lot of Lightroom users switch due to the efficiency and ability to edit large weddings, select them, edit them, all the above. Biggest thing to remember, don't fear the interface, customize it. Take some time. Like with anything new, take some time, get used to it, make it your own. Personalization will save you so much time and frustration. If you're used to Lightroom, make Capture One look like Lightroom. But remember, they are different interfaces. They are different programs, raw processors. So treat them that way. Don't expect everything in Capture One to be the same. Drop the before and after previews, speech about that's why Lightroom's great. Who cares? We have the option to do Command R on an image to reset it. We can do Command R and we can do Command Z. Before and after. It's very simple. It's just adjusting your mindset. Another thing is the hovering over the cursor. There are hotkeys for exposure adjustments and things of that nature. There are a lot of tools that are separate from the keyboard to use as well. Again, you can just use, if you're a camera raw person, you're not going to skip a beat. You still have to click on the slider. But again, Capture One, check it out. Free 30-day trial. Let me know if you guys have any questions or anything else that you use to customize. I'm definitely interested to hear. And that's all I have for you. Thanks for tuning in.